The winter wind bit through Lieutenant Arya Hale's field jacket as she knelt beside Private Collins, wrapping gauze around his sprained ankle. The Christmas wind coming off the ocean was vicious this time of year, cold enough to make the long scar running from her cheekbone to her jawline throb with remembered pain. Every gust of salt spray made it ache, a constant reminder of things she'd rather forget. "Thanks, Doc," Collins muttered, looking anywhere but at her face. She'd stopped correcting them months ago. She wasn't a doctor, just a field medic. But the distinction didn't matter to most of the unit. What mattered was the scar and the rumors that came with it. "Keep weight off it for 48 hours, Arya said, her voice flat and professional. "Ice when you can." As Collins limped away, Sergeant Morrison appeared in the doorway of the makeshift medical tent. Behind him, the small coastal village sprawled down the rocky hillside toward the churning gray sea. Christmas lights hung from the houses, brave little points of color against the slate sky. "Hey, Scar," Morrison called out, using the nickname that had stuck since her first week with the unit. "You gonna patch us up if we get drunk tonight? Or you gonna let us bleed?" A few of the other soldiers laughed. Arya didn't respond, just continued organizing her medical supplies with methodical precision. The silence stretched until Morrison shifted uncomfortably and walked away, muttering something about Ice Queen medics. She'd heard worse. In the 8 months since her transfer to this unit, she'd been called everything from Frankenstein's bride to the butcher, always whispered just loud enough for her to hear, never quite loud enough to be called insubordination. Nobody knew why she'd been transferred here, to this backwater posting, protecting a village nobody cared about. Nobody knew her real history, and that was exactly how Arya wanted it. Captain Reynolds stuck his head into the tent an hour later. Unlike the others, he looked her in the eye when he spoke. "Lieutenant Hale, intel brief in 15 minutes. Command wants everyone present." "Yes, sir," she replied crisply. The village elder's house served as their temporary command center. It smelled like pine and old wood, and someone had hung a wreath on the door despite the military occupation. Inside, the unit's 23 soldiers crowded around a folding table covered in maps and satellite photos. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Listen up. We've got intel suggesting a mercenary group is operating in the region. Possible weapons trafficking. This village may have witnesses fishermen who saw something they shouldn't have." "So what's the threat level?" asked Lieutenant Vance, the unit's tactical officer. "Low to moderate," Reynolds replied. "Mercs might try to intimidate the locals, maybe rough up a few witnesses. We're here to deter that. Show of force. Command says we hold position until the relief ship arrives day after tomorrow, then we rotate out." Arya studied the terrain map while the others talked. The village clung to the side of a steep cliff face, with a rocky beach below and dense pine forest above. The geography created natural choke points, but also natural ambush positions. The cliff itself was a sheer wall of stone rising 300 feet above the ocean, slick with spray and treacherous even in good weather. Something about the intel bothered her. Mercenaries who traffic weapons don't usually waste resources on witness intimidation. They eliminate threats efficiently and move on. If they were coming here, it wouldn't be for intimidation. It would be for extermination. "Sir," she said quietly, "have we considered that this might be a larger operation than—" "Lieutenant Hale," Reynolds cut her off, not unkindly but firmly. "Your medical staff. Let the tactical officers handle threat assessment." Arya closed her mouth. Around the table, she saw a few suppressed smirks. Morrison stage whispered to the soldier next to him, maybe she should stick to Band-Aids. The meeting dissolved into logistics, talk guard rotations, patrol schedules, Christmas dinner arrangements. Arya remained silent, studying the map, tracing the cliff face with her eyes. Up there, in the wind and spray, was where a shooter would position. Up there, invisible in the fog, was where death would come from if it came at all. She'd know. She used to be the one delivering it. That night, Arya lay in her bunk in the converted storage room, listening to the ocean hammer against the rocks below. Through the thin walls, she could hear the others celebrating Christmas Eve with contraband whiskey and off-key carols. They sounded happy. Young. Most of them had never seen real combat. She pressed her fingers against her scar, feeling the ridge of damaged tissue. The doctors had done good work, it could have been much worse. But every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the face of the little girl she'd saved that night, 5 years ago, in the frozen north. The girl whose father had tried to kill them both. The girl whose scream had distracted Arya just long enough for a knife to open her face from cheekbone to jaw. The girl who was alive because Arya had picked up a rifle instead of a scalpel. She'd quit the next day. Walked away from the Black Ops unit, from the legendary call sign Ghostlight, from the life where she'd been one of the world's most feared precision shooters. She'd retrained as a medic, transferred to conventional forces, taken a different oath. First, do no harm. But old skills don't disappear. They just hibernate, waiting in the dark parts of your muscle memory, ready to wake up the moment you need them. Through her window, Arya could see Christmas lights reflecting off the fog-shrouded sea. Somewhere out there, she thought she saw movement, just a flicker, maybe a boat light going dark. She watched for 10 minutes, but saw nothing more. Probably nothing. Probably just paranoia from too many years operating in the shadows. She lay back down and closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. Tomorrow was Christmas Day. Tomorrow, the villagers would cook a feast. Tomorrow, nothing would happen. Except her instincts, honed over 100 missions, whispered that tomorrow everything would happen. And that scar on her face began to throb like it always did before combat, like it was trying to warn her about the blood that was coming. Christmas morning broke cold and gray over the village. Arya was already awake, had been since 0400, unable to shake the crawling sensation between her shoulder blades that marked incoming danger. She'd done her morning patrol of the medical supplies, checked the emergency trauma kit 3 times, and now stood at the cliff's edge watching the ocean churn below. The fog was thick this morning, rolling in from the sea in dense banks that swallowed visibility after 50 yards. In her old life, she would have called this perfect hunting weather, the kind of conditions where a skilled shooter could move like a ghost, invisible until it was too late. "You're up early." Arya turned to find Captain Reynolds approaching, steaming coffee mug in hand. He offered her one, and she accepted gratefully. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. Reynolds nodded, staring out at the fog. "Something bothering you about yesterday's brief?" She chose her words carefully. "The intel feels incomplete, sir. Mercenaries don't usually announce themselves unless they're trying to draw attention away from something else. You think it's a diversion? I think we should prepare for worst-case scenarios. This village is isolated. Help is 2 days away. If someone wanted to eliminate witnesses and disappear, this would be the perfect setup." Reynolds sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "You know, your file says you transferred from a classified unit, never says what you actually did." Arya said nothing. "I don't care about your past, Lieutenant," Reynolds continued, "but I do care about my soldiers and these civilians. If you see something I'm missing, I want to know." Before Arya could respond, Private Chen came sprinting up the path, radio in hand. "Sir, patrol team at the southern point spotted signal flares. Multiple. Someone's out there." Reynolds was moving before Chen finished speaking. "Get everyone to positions. Full alert." The village erupted into controlled chaos. Soldiers grabbed weapons and moved to defensive positions while villagers were herded into the stone church at the village center, the most defensible structure. Arya organized her trauma station in the church basement, laying out supplies with practiced efficiency. Corporal Jennifer Hayes helped her set up. Hayes was one of the few soldiers who didn't use the nickname Scar, who actually looked at Arya like a person instead of a damaged piece of equipment. "You really think something's coming?" Hayes asked quietly. "Yes," Arya replied. No point in false comfort. The attack came an hour later, just after noon, when the Christmas feast was supposed to begin. The first sound was engines, high-powered marine engines cutting through the fog. Then shapes materialized from the gray murk, 4 speedboats, military-grade, loaded with armed figures in tactical gear. They hit the rocky beach at full speed, dozens of mercenaries pouring out like an invasion force. The peaceful Christmas morning exploded into violence. Gunfire echoed off the cliff face. The mercenaries moved with professional precision, not the sloppy tactics of thugs or intimidators. These were military-trained killers, and they'd brought enough firepower to level the entire village. "Contact! Contact!" someone screamed over the radio. "We've got at least 40 hostiles, maybe more." In the church basement, Arya heard the crackle of automatic weapons, the thump of grenades, the screams of injured soldiers and terrified civilians. She grabbed her aid bag and ran up the stairs. The village square was a war zone. Christmas decorations lay shattered among spent shell casings. Private Henderson was down, bleeding from his leg. Arya sprinted to him, sliding on her knees beside him as bullets pinged off the stone walls around them. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Henderson gasped. "I know. Look at me." Arya's voice was steady, her hands already working. "Tourniquet, pressure, assessment. You're going to be fine. Femoral artery is intact. Stay with me." More wounded appeared. Arya moved between them like a machine, her training taking over completely. Pack wounds. Stop bleeding. Stabilize. Move to the next casualty. The world narrowed to hands covered in blood, to keeping hearts beating 1 minute longer, to the desperate mathematics of triage. But even as she worked, her tactical mind, the part of her she'd tried to bury, was analyzing the battle. The mercenaries had high ground positions on the cliff. They'd set up a crossfire that had the village in a perfect kill box. Captain Reynolds was trying to organize a defense, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. They were losing, badly. Private Chen stumbled into the church, bleeding from a head wound. Arya grabbed him. "Report." "They're everywhere," Chen gasped. "Reinforcements came from the forest, too. We're surrounded." Captain Reynolds called for immediate evac, but the storm, he coughed blood. "Nearest help is 8 hours away, minimum." 8 hours. They had maybe 2. Arya finished bandaging Chen's head, her mind racing. 40-plus mercenaries with elevated positions and superior firepower. 23 soldiers, half of them already wounded. 200 civilians trapped in the church. It was a massacre in the making. She moved to the church door, staying low, assessing the battlefield with eyes that hadn't done this kind of analysis in 5 years. The mercenary positions were textbook overlapping fields of fire, covered approaches, dominant terrain. Whoever was running this operation knew exactly what they were doing. Then she saw him, a figure on the cliff face, 300 feet up, setting up a heavy machine gun position that would have a direct line of sight into the church. Once that gun was operational, everyone inside would be dead in minutes. Arya's hand unconsciously went to her scar, tracing the familiar ridge of tissue. In her mind, she could feel the weight of a rifle, see the distance calculation, factor the wind speed and elevation. Muscle memory whispered, "You could make that shot." "No," she said aloud, "not anymore." "Lieutenant," Corporal Hayes appeared, face streaked with dirt and fear. "We need you at the aid station. Morrison's hurt bad." Arya followed her down to the basement where Sergeant Morrison lay on a makeshift stretcher, his chest torn open by shrapnel. The man who'd called her Scar every day for 8 months now looked at her with desperate, pleading eyes. "Don't let me die," he whispered. "Please." Arya's hands moved automatically, opening his chest, finding the bleeders, keeping him alive through sheer force of will and technical skill. But even as she worked, she could hear the battle intensifying above. More screams, more gunfire, the sound of the mercenaries advancing. Morrison's hand suddenly gripped her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were glassy with pain and blood loss, but they were focused on her face, really looking at her for maybe the first time. "That Scar," he wheezed. "I heard. Stories. Northern operations. They said there was a shooter, called Ghostlight." His grip tightened. "They said she could shoot through fog, through darkness, like a ghost." He coughed blood. "If you're not that medic who barely knows which end of a rifle to hold, if you're someone else." He didn't finish. His eyes rolled back, and Arya had to focus completely on keeping his heart beating, but his words hung in the air like smoke. Hayes was staring at her. "Ma'am, is he talking nonsense or—" The building shook. Somewhere above, an explosion had blown out part of the church wall. Children were screaming. The mercenary machine gun on the cliff had opened fire, its bullets hammering into stone with mechanical precision. In the shadows of the basement, surrounded by the wounded and dying, Arya Hale made a choice. She stood up, Morrison's blood still wet on her hands, and looked at Hayes. "Keep them alive. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you keep them alive." "Where are you going?" Arya didn't answer. She was already moving toward the locked storage room in the back of the church basement, the room where she'd hidden something 8 months ago when she'd arrived at this posting, the room where she kept the parts of herself she'd sworn never to use again. Behind her, Hayes called out, "Lieutenant Hale." But Arya was done being just the medic with a scar. It was time for Ghostlight to come home. The storage room was barely 10 feet square, filled with church supplies and forgotten furniture covered in dust sheets. Arya moved through it like she'd memorized every inch, because she had. 8 months ago, she'd chosen this room specifically for its concrete walls and heavy door, a place where nobody would think to look. She knelt in the far corner and pulled up a loose floorboard. The case was right where she'd left it, wrapped in waterproof tarp and secured with 3 separate locks. Her hands trembled slightly as she entered the combinations, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Every turn of each dial felt like turning back time, resurrecting a version of herself she'd buried. The final lock clicked open. Inside lay the Ares 9, a custom sniper rifle that existed in exactly 3 places in the world. This one had been built specifically for her, engineered for the brutal conditions of coastal operations, corrosion-resistant metals, sealed scope housing, a stock designed to stabilize in high winds. The weapon felt alien in her hands after 5 years, yet her fingers found their positions automatically, muscle memory stronger than conscious thought. Next to the rifle, a maintenance kit, specialized ammunition, and a small black box containing the scope, a hybrid thermal optical system with environmental compensation algorithms that had cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Arya assembled the weapon in darkness, by touch alone, the way she'd done 100 times before. Each component locked into place with soft, precise clicks. The familiar weight settled across her back, and something fundamental shifted in her posture, in the way she moved. Lieutenant Arya Hale, the medic, was still there, still present. But something else had awakened too, something cold and precise that calculated angles and distances, that felt the wind like a living thing, that saw the battlefield not as chaos but as geometry. Ghostlight was awake. She emerged from the storage room to find Hayes staring at her, eyes wide. "What is that?" Hayes breathed. "Something I need to borrow," Arya said. "Keep everyone alive down here, no matter what you hear. But you're medical. Not tonight." Above them, the sound of gunfire intensified. Someone screamed. The building shook again as another explosion tore through the upper floors. Arya moved toward the stairs, then paused. She turned back to Hayes, and for a moment, the cold tactical mask slipped. "I made a promise 5 years ago that I wouldn't do this anymore. But tonight, I'm choosing which promise matters more, the one I made to myself, or the one I made when I took this uniform." She didn't wait for a response. The stairs led up through smoke and debris. Arya moved through the chaos of the church like a shadow, invisible to the panicked civilians and wounded soldiers. Nobody noticed the medic with a rifle. Their attention was fixed on staying alive in the present moment. Captain Reynolds saw her, though. He was barricading the main entrance with Sergeant Vance when Arya slipped past. His eyes tracked to the weapon, then to her face, and something clicked behind his expression, a piece falling into place, a mystery suddenly making sense. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "where are you going?" "To solve our problem, sir. That weapon, I know my way around it," she said simply. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. Outside, the mercenary machine gun continued its mechanical death song. They both knew that in minutes, maybe less, that gun would find the right angle and pour fire directly into the church's interior. Everyone would die. "How long since you did this kind of work?" Reynolds asked. 5 years, 3 months, 14 days. "Can you still?" "Yes, sir." No hesitation, no doubt. Reynolds looked at the wounded men behind him, at the terrified civilians huddled in the shadows, at the bloody handprints Arya had left everywhere from treating casualties. Then he looked at the rifle across her back. The cliff face is exposed. Wind speed up there is probably 40 knots, gusting higher. Visibility near zero, no cover. "I know. If you go up there and fail, I won't." Something in her voice, the absolute certainty, the cold, professional calm made Reynolds nod slowly. "Then go. We'll cover your approach as best we can." Arya turned toward the side entrance, the one that led to the steep path up the cliff face. Vance grabbed her arm. "Wait. If you were really one of the legends, if you were really Ghostlight, prove it. Tell me something only she would know." Arya looked at him steadily. 3 years ago, Operation Frozen Shield, Northern Coast. Command wanted to eliminate a weapons dealer operating out of a fishing village. Rules of engagement. No civilian casualties. Surgical strike only. But when Ghostlight arrived, she found 17 children being held in the target building. She radioed command, told them to scrub the mission. They refused. So she went in alone, extracted every child, then waited 72 hours in a blizzard until she had a clean shot on just the dealer. Zero collateral. She paused. "The mission report says the dealer died of natural causes. But 8 intelligence agencies know different. They know Ghostlight made a shot through a window, through a blizzard, across 700 meters, and put a single round precisely where it needed to be." Vance's face had gone pale. "That's classified. Nobody knows those details except the shooter," Arya finished. "Now, let me go do my job." She was out the door before either man could respond, moving into the smoke-filled chaos of the village square. Bullets pinged off stones around her, but she was already calculating, timing, flowing between cover points like water. This was the part of herself she'd tried to kill, the part that turned into smoke and shadows when death was in the air. The path up the cliff face was barely visible through the fog. Arya began to climb, the Ares 9 secure across her back, her hands finding holds in the slick rock. Wind tore at her with savage force, trying to rip her from the stone. Salt spray made every surface treacherous, But she'd trained for worse, had operated in worse. And somewhere deep in her DNA, her body remembered exactly how to do this, how to become part of the environment, invisible even in motion. As she climbed, her scar began to throb in time with her heartbeat. The tissue there was hypersensitive to temperature changes, and the icy wind made it feel like the wound was fresh again, bleeding all over again. Pain was good, though. Pain kept her sharp. Pain reminded her why she'd stopped doing this, and why she had to do it one more time. 300 feet below, the village burned. Above her, somewhere in the fog, mercenaries were setting up positions to massacre everyone she'd spent the day trying to save. Arya climbed faster, her breath controlled, her movements economical. The medic was gone now. Only the ghost remained. And the ghost was very, very angry. Arya reached the cliff top as the wind shifted, briefly clearing the fog enough to reveal the battlefield below. From this height, she could see the full tactical situation, and it was even worse than she'd calculated. The mercenaries had positioned 3 heavy weapons teams on strategic points. The machine gun team she'd spotted earlier was the closest, about 200 meters to her left. Beyond them, a mortar crew was preparing to drop shells directly onto the church. And further back, near the tree line, she counted at least 6 sniper teams establishing overwatch positions. This wasn't a raid. This was a military-grade elimination operation. Arya settled into a depression in the rocks, assembling her shooting position with the automatic precision of thousands of hours of training. The Ares 9 came to her shoulder like an old friend. She activated the scope, and the fog-shrouded battlefield suddenly resolved into crisp thermal imagery. 43 hostiles. She counted them methodically, categorizing by threat level and priority. The machine gun crew was 30 seconds from having the church in their sights. They died first. Her finger found the trigger. This was always the moment, the eternal second before the choice becomes irreversible. 5 years ago, she'd sworn never to take a life again. 5 years of keeping that promise, of being the person who saved lives instead of ending them. Below, through her scope, she saw a little girl, maybe 6 years old, pressed against the church window, face white with terror. Arya's finger tightened. The Ares 9 breathed once. 300 meters away, the mercenary manning the machine gun dropped instantly, killed before he even knew death was coming. His spotter turned in confusion, and the rifle breathed again. 2 shots, 2 seconds apart, and the machine gun position was neutralized. Below in the village, everyone froze, soldiers and mercenaries alike, trying to understand where those shots had come from, trying to process how someone could shoot with that precision through this fog. Then, one of the mercenaries started screaming, "Ghostlight! Ghostlight is here! Abort! Abort!" The name rippled through both forces like an electric shock. In the church, Corporal Hayes turned to Captain Reynolds with wide eyes. "Sir, did he just say?" "Focus on the wounded, Corporal." Reynolds cut her off, but his own hands were shaking. On the cliff top, Arya was already moving, changing position even as her next 2 targets appeared in her scope. The mortar crew was frantically trying to get a round loaded, but they were exposed, vulnerable. She dropped the loader with a shot to the upper chest, not immediately fatal, she calculated, but enough to take him out of the fight. The gunner panicked and ran. She let him go. He wasn't a threat anymore. The mercenary communications network exploded with chatter. Arya could hear fragments through their radio discipline breaking down. Confirmed Ghostlight signature shots. How is she here? She's supposed to be retired. Someone get a goddamn fix on her position. A burst of automatic fire tore through the air inches from Arya's head, forcing her to roll behind a larger boulder. One of the sniper teams had spotted her muzzle flash. She smiled coldly. Good, let them think they'd pinned her down. She low-crawled 20 meters to a new position, the movement so ingrained she could do them unconscious. From here, she had a clear sight line to the sniper team that had shot at her. They were scanning the rocks where she'd been, not where she was now. Amateur mistake. Ghostlight never stayed in one place. She took the shot. The sniper's thermal signature bloomed and faded. His spotter scrambled for the rifle, and Arya had to make a choice, wound or kill. The man was just doing his job, probably had a family, probably wasn't even a bad person in normal circumstances. But he was part of a force trying to massacre 200 civilians. She shot him through the shoulder. He'd live, but he wouldn't be shooting back. The battle rhythm shifted. The mercenary commander, whoever he was, started pulling his forces back, consolidating defensive positions. They'd come here expecting to fight soldiers, not to be hunted by a legend they'd thought was myth. But there were still too many of them, and Arya had a limited ammunition supply. She needed to break their will to fight, not just reduce their numbers. That's when she spotted him, the commander, distinguishable by his body language and the way other mercenaries deferred to him. He was positioned near the tree line, coordinating the retreat through hand signals. Arya adjusted her scope. The distance was extreme, nearly 500 meters. The wind was gusting unpredictably. The shot would require compensating for the temperature differential between the warm air rising from the burning village and the cold air coming off the ocean. She'd have to account for the Coriolis effect at this range, have to time the trigger pull between gusts. It was the kind of shot that had made Ghostlight a legend in the first place. She settled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow. The world narrowed to the crosshairs and the target. Wind gust from the left, wait. Now from the right, compensate. Heartbeat steady. Temperature drop as a wave of fog rolled in, adjust. Wait. Now. The Ares 9 spoke. 500 meters away, the mercenary commander spun and dropped. Not dead, she'd deliberately taken him in the leg, exactly where it would incapacitate without killing. She'd made him a casualty instead of a corpse, which meant his men would have to use resources to extract him instead of fighting. More importantly, she'd proven that nowhere on this battlefield was safe. The mercenary force broke. They didn't run, these were professionals, but they executed a tactical withdrawal with the kind of desperate speed that said they wanted nothing to do with fighting a ghost sniper in the fog. They loaded their wounded into speedboats and disappeared into the gray murk, engines roaring. The entire engagement had lasted 14 minutes. Arya remained in position for another 20 minutes, scanning for stragglers or counterattacks. But the mercenaries were truly gone, running from a legend they'd thought was safely retired. As she finally began to break down her position, her radio crackled to life. Captain Reynolds' voice. Ghostlight. If you can hear me, the village is secure. Return to base. She didn't respond. Ghostlight never did. The climb down was harder than the climb up. Adrenaline was fading, exhaustion setting in, and her hands were shaking from cold and the weight of what she'd just done. By the time she reached the village square, full darkness had fallen. The scene that greeted her was surreal. The Christmas lights that hadn't been destroyed in the fighting had come back on, casting the smoke and rubble in festive colors. Soldiers were moving among the wounded, and civilians were emerging cautiously from the church. Arya walked through it all like a ghost herself, the Ares 9 now broken down and concealed in her medical bag. She headed straight for the church basement, where Hayes was still working on the wounded. Morrison was awake, pale but stable. He stared at Arya as she entered, and she saw recognition in his eyes. "It was you," he said hoarsely. "All this time, you were her." "I'm a medic," Arya replied quietly, moving to check his vitals. "You're Ghostlight." She didn't confirm or deny, just continued her medical assessment with professional detachment. But around the room, other wounded soldiers were staring at her now, seeing her differently. The scar on her face suddenly looked less like a mark of shame and more like a battle wound, earned in combat. Hayes approached her carefully. "Ma'am, Captain Reynolds wants to see you. He's upstairs." Arya nodded and headed up to the main church floor. Reynolds was there with Lieutenant Vance, both looking exhausted and relieved and slightly terrified all at once. "Lieutenant Hale," Reynolds said formally, "I need to ask you some questions." "I understand, sir. Your official record says you transferred from medical services, but you clearly have advanced tactical training. You own a classified weapons system, and you just neutralized a superior enemy force single-handedly using techniques that only a handful of people in the world can execute." Arya stood at attention, saying nothing. "The mercenaries were calling you Ghostlight. That's the operational name of a Black Ops sniper who was active 5 years ago in Northern Operations. That sniper was never photographed, never identified, and officially doesn't exist." Reynolds paused. "But I'm looking at her right now, aren't I?" "I did what needed to be done, sir." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have, sir." Vance spoke up. "If you were really part of Black Ops, why are you here? Why take a posting as a medical officer in a backwater unit?" Arya's hand unconsciously went to her scar. "Because I made a choice, sir. 5 years ago, I decided that I'd save my last life by taking another life. I retrained. I transferred. I became someone else. But tonight you went back," Reynolds said quietly. "Yes, sir. Tonight I went back." She met his eyes. "Because the alternative was watching everyone die, including a child who looked exactly like the child I got this scar protecting." The room fell silent. Outside, someone had started singing a Christmas carol off-key and wavering, but defiant, life returning to the darkness. Finally, Reynolds nodded. "I'm going to have to report this. Command will want to debrief you. There will be questions about your credentials, your background, everything. I understand, sir. But, Reynolds continued, that report won't be filed until after Christmas, and it will note that you saved this entire village and every soldier under my command. Whatever happens next, you have my gratitude. Thank you, sir. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Get some rest. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be complicated. Arya left the church and walked to the cliff's edge, where she'd stood that morning a lifetime ago. The fog was clearing now, revealing stars and a half-moon reflecting off the black ocean. In the distance, she could see the lights of the relief ship approaching, finally arriving now that the danger had passed. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Corporal Hayes appeared, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, Hayes said, offering one. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sea. Finally, Hayes spoke. The others are calling you Ghostlight now. Some are scared, some are in awe. Morrison can't stop talking about how you saved his life twice, once as a medic, once as a sniper. I'm just Lieutenant Hale, Arya said quietly. No, Hayes replied gently. You're both. And maybe that's okay. Arya touched her scar, feeling the raised tissue. For 5 years, she'd seen it as a mark of failure the moment she'd let emotion compromise her tactical awareness, the night she'd stopped being Ghostlight. But maybe Hayes was right. Maybe it was a reminder that she was both the person who could kill with precision and the person who would risk her life to save a child. Maybe being both was the point. The Christmas stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles. But down in the village, lights were coming back on. People were singing. Life was continuing. And somewhere on a cliff above it all, a woman with a scar stood watch, ready to be whatever she needed to be to protect the people under her care. Medic or sniper, healer or warrior, Arya Hale or Ghostlight. On this Christmas night, she'd finally accepted that she was all of these things, and that maybe she always had been. Christmas morning arrived with unexpected clarity, the fog burned away by a cold sun that painted the ocean silver and gold. Arya hadn't slept. She'd spent the night in the medical station, treating wounded soldiers and trying not to think about the 14 shots she'd fired from the cliff top. 14 shots, 12 hits on combatants, 2 warning shots, 0 confirmed kills. She'd been precise about that. Even in the chaos, even with 100 ways to justify lethal force, she'd chosen her shots carefully. Shoulders instead of heads, legs instead of chests, disabling wounds that would take fighters out of action without ending their lives. Because that was the difference between who she'd been and who she'd become. Ghostlight would have killed efficiently, ruthlessly, completed the mission with maximum effect. But Arya Hale was a medic first, and medics saved lives even when those lives belonged to enemies. Hayes found her at 0600, staring at her hands in the pale morning light. They were clean now, she'd scrubbed the blood away, but she could still see the stains in her mind. Captain Reynolds wants everyone assembled, Hayes said quietly. The relief ship docked an hour ago. Command sent some brass. Of course they did, Arya replied. The village square had been hastily cleared of debris. The Christmas decorations that survived looked incongruous against the bullet-pocked walls and burn marks. Villagers stood on their doorsteps, watching as the military personnel gathered. Captain Reynolds stood beside a stern-looking colonel Arya didn't recognize. Behind them, 2 military police officers waited with carefully neutral expressions. Arya's stomach tightened. This was either a commendation ceremony or an arrest. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. "Attention," Reynolds called. The unit snapped to formation, 23 soldiers, several bandaged and limping, but alive. All of them alive because of last night. The colonel stepped forward. "I'm Colonel Patricia Brennan, Strategic Operations Command. I've been briefed on last night's engagement." She paused, scanning the assembled faces. "Where is Lieutenant Arya Hale?" Arya stepped forward. "Here, ma'am." Brennan's eyes tracked to the scar, then to Arya's face, studying her with the intensity of someone trained to read people. "Lieutenant, your commanding officer reports that you single-handedly repelled a numerically superior force using advanced marksmanship techniques. He also reports that you were in possession of a classified weapon system that should not exist in conventional forces." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you deny these allegations?" Arya met the colonel's gaze steadily. "No, ma'am, I don't." Murmurs rippled through the assembled soldiers. Brennan raised a hand for silence. "Lieutenant Hale, you have 2 choices. You can accompany the MPs back to headquarters for a full investigation into your credentials, your possession of classified equipment, and the circumstances of your transfer to this unit. This investigation will be thorough and may result in disciplinary action. She paused. Or you can accept immediate reassignment to my command, no questions asked about your past, and continue doing what you clearly do very well. The square went silent. Arya processed this, understanding the subtext. Someone in command knew exactly who she was, had probably known all along where Ghostlight had disappeared to, and had decided last night's display was too valuable to waste on bureaucratic punishment. "May I ask a question, ma'am?" Arya said. "Go ahead. If I accept reassignment, what would my duties be?" "Same as last night," Brennan replied bluntly. "Situations that require someone who can be both a combat medic and a precision operator. Missions where saving lives means being prepared to take them. We have a lot of villages like this one, places where good people need protection from bad actors. You'd help protect them." Arya looked at the villagers watching from their doorways. She saw the little girl she'd spotted through the scope last night, now standing safely next to her mother. Saw the old men who'd survived because she'd climbed that cliff. Saw the future that had almost been taken from all of them. Then she looked at her unit at Morrison, who'd survived his chest wound and was standing at attention despite obvious pain. At Hayes, who'd kept the wounded alive while Arya was hunting. At Reynolds, who'd trusted her when he had no reason to. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Arya asked. "Granted. I spent 5 years trying to stop being what I was, trying to be just a medic, just a healer. I thought that was the only way to live with what I'd done." She touched her scar unconsciously. "But last night taught me something. I can't separate who I was from who I am. They're both me. And maybe that's okay. Maybe being both is what makes me useful." "Is that a yes, Lieutenant?" "No, ma'am." Arya took a breath. "It's a condition." Colonel Brennan's eyebrow rose. "You're negotiating?" "If I return to operational status, I work exclusively to protect civilians and allied personnel. I don't do assassinations. I don't do political operations. I save lives, even if that means fighting to do it. And I have final authority on target selection. If you order me to shoot someone I believe shouldn't be shot, I reserve the right to refuse." The MPs tensed, clearly expecting Brennan to explode at this insubordination. But the colonel's face remained impassive. "You're asking for something no operator has ever been granted," Brennan said. "Moral veto authority over target selection." "Yes, ma'am, because without it, I'm just a weapon, and I stopped being just a weapon 5 years ago." The silence stretched. Reynolds looked like he wanted to intervene but couldn't figure out how. Vance was staring at Arya like she'd grown a second head. The entire unit held its breath. Finally, Brennan spoke. "Counteroffer. You get target consultation authority, not veto, but your assessment carries significant weight. You work with a team, not alone. And every 6 months, you undergo psychological evaluation to ensure you maintain operational capacity. And if I don't maintain operational capacity, then you get what you wanted 5 years ago, medical duty, no questions asked, honorable service record." Arya considered this. It wasn't everything she'd asked for, but it was more than she'd expected. More importantly, it was honest. Brennan wasn't trying to control her, she was offering a partnership. "One more condition," Arya said. "You're pushing your luck, Lieutenant. I need to stay connected to this unit. Monthly rotations, minimum. I need to remember why I'm doing this." Reynolds spoke up. "Ma'am, if I may, having Lieutenant Hale rotate through would be a significant morale boost. The soldiers would benefit from training with someone of her caliber." Brennan studied them both, then nodded slowly. "Acceptable. Lieutenant Hale, you'll report to Strategic Operations Command for reassignment, but you'll maintain your affiliation with Captain Reynolds' unit. You'll receive updated credentials, equipment authorization, and a new official cover identity." She paused. "You'll also receive a promotion. Captain Hale has a better ring to it." "Ma'am, I don't need. It's not negotiable. The pay grade reflects the reality of what you do." Brennan's expression softened slightly. "You did good work last night, Hale. Saved a lot of lives. Command wants to make sure you can keep doing that work." She turned to address the entire unit. "Let me be clear to everyone assembled. What happened last night stays classified. You will not discuss Ghostlight, you will not speculate about Lieutenant Captain Hale's background, and you will not share details of this engagement beyond official reports. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," came the unified response. "Good. Dismissed. Captain Hale, you're with me. We have logistics to discuss." As the formation broke up, Arya found herself surrounded by her unit. Morrison approached first, moving stiffly from his wound. "Captain," he said, the honorific, deliberate, and respectful, "I owe you an apology. For the nickname, for the disrespect, for not seeing who you really were." Arya shook her head. "You saw exactly who I was, a medic, That part wasn't fake. But we missed the rest. The part that saved all our lives. Hayes stepped forward. Sir, will you still do rotations with us? Because I'd really like to learn from you. The medical stuff and the other stuff. I'll be back, Arya promised. Every month, you'll get sick of seeing me. Not possible, sir, Hayes replied with a grin. The rest of the day dissolved into logistics, inventory checks, casualty reports, debriefs. Colonel Brennan proved to be efficient and pragmatic, cutting through bureaucracy with the ease of someone who'd done this many times before. By evening, Arya's new credentials were processed, her equipment officially authorized, and her reassignment finalized. She stood one last time at the cliff's edge as the sun set, painting the ocean in shades of amber and rose. Below, the village was rebuilding. Christmas lights that had survived the battle glowed defiantly against the gathering darkness. Reynolds found her there. Hell of a Christmas, he said. Yes, sir. You know, I looked you up in the classified databases. Took some creative access requests, but I found fragments of your file. Operation Frozen Shield. Operation Nightfall. Operation Silent Thunder. He paused. 73 confirmed missions. 89 enemy combatants eliminated. 0 civilian casualties attributed to your actions. 0 friendly fire incidents. Perfect record. That was a different person, Arya said quietly. Was it? Or was it the same person who spent all of yesterday keeping my soldiers alive in a trauma station? I don't know anymore. Reynolds turned to face her directly. I think you do know. I think you've always known. You're not a killer who learned to heal. You're a protector who learned every skill necessary to protect people. The shooting, the medicine, they're both tools in the same mission. Arya touched her scar, thinking of the little girl who'd given it to her. The little girl whose scream had broken Ghostlight's cold precision and revealed the human underneath. Maybe you're right, she admitted. Of course I'm right. I'm a captain. Reynolds smiled. Oh wait, you're a captain now too. Guess we're equals. Technically, my promotion is dated 2 days before yours. Technically, you're a pain in the ass. They stood in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead. After a while, Reynolds spoke again. You saved us, Arya. You saved all of us. And you did it while staying true to who you've become. That's pretty extraordinary. I just did what needed doing. That's what heroes always say. Below them, someone started singing a Christmas carol, the same off-key, defiant singing from last night, but happier now, celebratory. Other voices joined in, creating a chorus that rose up to the cliff top, carrying hope and gratitude in equal measure. Arya listened to the singing, felt the cold wind on her face, tasted the salt spray that made her scar ache. But this time, the ache felt different. Not like pain, but like memory. Not like shame, but like a reminder of why she'd made the choices she'd made. I'm going to miss this unit, she said finally. We'll be here every month when you rotate back, Reynolds assured her. Hayes is already planning advanced medical training sessions. Morrison wants tactical drills. Even Vance admitted you could teach him a few things about long-range shooting. Morrison should focus on healing before he worries about drills. He's young. He'll heal fast. They all will. Reynolds paused. Because you saved them, both as Ghostlight and as Lieutenant Captain Hale. The relief ship sounded its horn, signaling departure in 1 hour. Time to leave this village, this unit, this moment of crystalline clarity about who she was and what she was meant to do. But she'd be back. Every month, back to the people who'd seen both sides of her and accepted them. Back to the place where she'd finally understood that her scar wasn't a mark of failure, it was a badge of humanity. Proof that the killer had a heart and the healer had claws. As she walked down from the cliff for the last time, Arya passed the little girl from the window, the one whose terror had pulled her trigger finger last night. The child looked up at her with wide eyes. Are you the lady who saved us? The girl asked in a small voice. Arya knelt down to her level. I helped, but lots of people saved you. The soldiers, the other villagers, your mom who kept you safe. But they said you were magic. They said you could see through the fog. Not magic, Arya replied gently. Just training and a promise I made a long time ago. A promise to protect people who need protecting. The girl reached out and touched Arya's scar with innocent curiosity. Does it hurt? Sometimes, Arya admitted, but it reminds me why I do what I do. So in a way, I'm glad I have it. I think it makes you look brave. Something in Arya's chest cracked open at that, the simple wisdom of a child seeing clearly what adults complicated. The scar wasn't ugly or shameful, it was evidence. Evidence that she'd fought for something that mattered, that she'd put her body between danger and innocence, that she'd paid a price worth paying. Thank you, Arya whispered. The girl smiled and ran back to her mother. Arya stood slowly, watching them disappear into their house, into their future, a future that existed because of choices made in darkness and fog. The ship's horn sounded again. Time to go. But as Arya walked toward the dock, she wasn't walking away from anything. She was walking toward something, toward a life where both halves of herself could coexist, where Ghostlight and Arya Hale were partners instead of